When the armies of the coalition spread across the plains of Varn, they darkened the horizon, an endless sea of banners, metal, and war machines rolling like a living storm. The air itself trembled with their march. An empire's worth of soldiers come to erase the name of humanity from the stars. They said the war would be brief. They said it would be clean. They said the Deathworlders would finally be humbled. They didn't understand what that word meant. Not yet. The Deathworlders, born of a planet that tried to kill them every day, had never once bowed to extinction. They had adapted. They had endured. And when the stars gave them enemies, they did what they had always done. They fought, not to win, but to survive. And in surviving, they became something unstoppable. On the observation ridge above the battlefield, General Sarath of the Coalition's 5th Legion peered through the haze of dust and ozone. "Reports?" he demanded, his scaled lips curling in irritation. The comms officer, a nervous avian, adjusted his headset. "Still no contact from forward scouts, sir. Last transmission came 5 hours ago. They reported. Movement in the mist." Sarath frowned. "Movement? What kind?" "They said it wasn't mechanical, sir. Said it moved like animals." The general's spines bristled. "Animals? On a battlefield this size? Impossible. There's no biosphere left in this sector." But even as he said it, a low rumble echoed across the plain. Not thunder, not machines, something else. A pulse that made his chest tighten. He raised his binoculars. At first he saw nothing but heat distortion and the glint of his own legions, rows upon rows of armored infantry and plasma carriers. Then something shifted. Shadows darting between wrecked transports, shapes too fast to lock onto. The ground rippled. "What in the name of the Empress is that?" Sarath muttered. The avian swallowed hard. "Sir, long-range sensors show multiple heat signatures closing from the north, west, and east. Fast movers, too irregular for vehicles. Estimated..." Static drowned his words. Then, from the dust, a sound broke through the wind. A deep, wordless cry. A roar that wasn't mechanical, wasn't alien. It was human. The first wave of coalition infantry tightened ranks. Shields deployed. Plasma rifles hummed to full charge. The soldiers had been told this would be an extermination campaign, a sweep and cleanse of a rogue species. The humans were few, they said. Their weapons primitive, their logistics failing. The Deathworlders were a dying breed clinging to the myths of a dead Earth. But when the fog parted, what emerged did not look like something dying. The humans came in broken armor, scavenged from dozens of wars. Their faces were streaked with mud and ash, their eyes glowing behind cracked visors. They moved in silence until the first plasma volley lit the sky. Then all hell broke loose. The Deathworlders charged headlong into the storm of plasma fire, screaming like madmen, their heavy suits absorbing impacts that should have vaporized them. Coalition lines held for seconds, then buckled as the humans hit. They didn't fire first. They closed the distance, slamming into the front ranks with knives, axes, even bare fists. Combat mechs fell under a tide of infantry that fought like berserkers. The humans didn't advance in formation. They swarmed, coordinated through instinct and madness, moving like predators through tall grass. Every one of them fought as if they were the last alive. Sarath could only watch in horror as the death count climbed. "Deploy the Titans," he barked. "All of them! Crush them!" Massive quadrupedal tanks lurched forward, each one bristling with railguns and flamers, their engines roaring as they unleashed hellfire across the field. For a moment the tide shifted. Human bodies burned, armor cracked. The air stank of scorched ozone and blood. The coalition officers cheered prematurely, until the Titans stopped firing. One by one their systems went dark. Smoke rose from their joints. Then, explosions, internal and precise. Sarath's jaw tightened. How did they breach the cores?" he shouted. "Those systems are sealed." The avian beside him stammered. "Reports indicate infiltration, sir. They're inside the Titans." Through his scope, Sarath saw it. A human crawling out of a shattered vent on the Titan's back, covered in oil and blood, grinning as he pulled the pin on a grenade and vanished into the fire. That was when the Coalition realized what it truly meant to face Deathworlders. It wasn't their weapons, or their numbers, or their technology. It was their refusal to die quietly. Humanity didn't fight for glory or conquest. They fought because the alternative was extinction. And extinction was something they'd already looked in the eye 1,000 times, on a planet that had never once cared if they lived or not. By nightfall, the battlefield was chaos. Communications had collapsed. The Coalition's numerical superiority meant nothing in the dust and smoke. The humans had melted into the terrain, striking like ghosts, dragging wounded soldiers into the fog and leaving behind only screams. Serath's command outpost was hit twice, the second time by orbital artillery that somehow changed trajectory mid-flight. "Sir!" the avian yelled over the din. "We're losing power across the ridge. The Deathworlders have hacked our grid." "That's impossible," Serath snapped. "Their systems are centuries behind ours." But deep down, he knew better. Human adaptability wasn't measured in years of technological progress. It was measured in desperation. They had taken every alien system they'd ever fought, torn it apart, learned its insides, and used it against its makers. On Earth, survival meant learning the ways of things that could kill you. That instinct had never left them. Far to the west, among the shattered remains of a downed cruiser, Sergeant Rhea Lorne adjusted her battered exosuit and listened to the static chatter in her earpiece. "You seeing this, Command?" she said, her voice ragged. "We've got heavy armor burning from the inside out. Coalition's pulling back." A pause. Then a voice, calm and gravel-thick. "Good work, Lorne. Keep pressure on their right flank." "Reinforcements are inbound." Rhea laughed bitterly. "Reinforcements? From where? We're the last damn army left." "Then make it count," the voice said. "For Earth." She rose, slinging her rifle, and motioned to the dozen soldiers crouched beside her. "You heard the man. Let's remind them what a Deathworlder looks like." They moved out through the smoke, their boots crunching over the bones of machines and soldiers alike. The stars overhead were dimmed by the haze of war, and for a moment Rhea thought of the stories her grandmother used to tell, of oceans and forests, of a world gone now but not forgotten. Humanity had come so far from that blue planet, but no matter how far they ran, they carried its fury with them. By the time the second dawn rose, the once proud armies of the Coalition were in retreat. But Serath did not order withdrawal. Not yet. Pride held him fast. "They cannot win," he said to himself, his claws digging into the edge of the command table. "They are too few." The avian didn't respond. He just stared at the field feed, a sea of smoke, fire, and broken machines. From the shadows, human silhouettes moved, slow and steady, as if they had all the time in the world. "Sir," the avian finally whispered, "what if they don't need to win?" Serath turned sharply. "What are you implying?" "What if victory isn't what they came for? What if all they want is for us to bleed?" Outside, the wind carried a sound like laughter. Hoarse, human laughter echoing through the ruins. It wasn't mockery. It was something older, something primal. Serath shivered as he realized the truth. This wasn't a battle for territory. It was a lesson. The Deathworlders were teaching the galaxy what war really meant. As night fell once more, the stars above flickered behind clouds of drifting ash. For the first time in his long military career, General Serath felt fear. True, paralyzing fear. Not of death, but of the thing he had unleashed by coming here. Humanity wasn't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to remind the universe why they had survived when so many others had fallen. And as the Deathworlders gathered on the hills, their eyes glowing like embers, their armor dented and their weapons smoking, they stood in silence for the fallen. Not in mourning, but in promise. Because the war wasn't over. It was only the beginning. By the third day of battle, the plains of Varn had become a graveyard of steel. The black smoke of burning titans rose like funeral pyres, their twisted husks jutting from the earth like monuments to arrogance. The once clear skies were a dim red haze, lit only by the glow of orbital bombardments and the burning contrails of downed ships. The Coalition had come in numbers that could blot out the sun, but against the Deathworlders, Numbers had lost all meaning. They had never fought an enemy that refused to stay dead, that crawled out of the dirt bleeding and laughing, still holding a knife in their teeth. For every human body that fell, 3 coalition soldiers were dragged down with it. General Sarath's command center had become a hive of chaos. Reports of disappearing platoons, blackouts across the front lines, and strange radio interference that whispered in the coalition's own encrypted channels. Sarath slammed his fist against the hollow table, his spines quivering. "We are the might of the galaxy," he snarled. "You expect me to believe a handful of savages is dismantling an army of 50 million? The comms officer looked ready to collapse. "Sir, with respect, these aren't savages. They're adapting. Every time we change tactics, they shift before the order even reaches their ranks. They fight like a single organism, not an army." Sarath bared his teeth. "Then burn them. Burn the whole field." And so, the sky opened. Coalition ships in low orbit unleashed the fire of the heavens. Plasma storms rained down, liquefying the surface of Varn. The air screamed, the earth boiled, and for a moment, Sarath believed he had done it, that the Deathworlders had finally been consumed. But then came the screams on the comms. "They're still coming! The humans! They're in the fire!" The cameras confirmed it. Figures moved through the flames, silhouettes of charred armor and molten metal, their suits melting as they pressed forward. They weren't human anymore, not in the way the galaxy understood the word. They were creatures of fury and defiance, crawling through hell itself to tear the enemy apart. And when the fire died, they were gone again, swallowed by the smoke, only to rise behind the coalition's own lines. They dug beneath the bombardment, using the tunnels left by impact craters to flank from underground. Rhea Lorne crawled through one such tunnel, her suit creaking with every movement. The air was thick with soot and blood, and her motion sensor pulsed faintly in the dark. Behind her, 3 soldiers followed, what was left of her platoon. "Command," she whispered into her cracked comm. "We're under their line. Coalition artillery has gone silent for now. We're moving to strike the rear." Static answered, then a faint voice. "Commander Vale." "Copy, Lorne. You're clear to move. Be advised, enemy fleet is repositioning. They're preparing an orbital push. If they take orbit, we lose ground support." Rhea gritted her teeth. "Then we'll make damn sure they never leave the ground." They emerged into a gutted trench, once belonging to the coalition's forward gunners. Corpses littered the mud, most alien, some human. Rhea raised her rifle and signaled forward. "Targets of opportunity," she murmured. Quiet kills. They moved like wraiths, dispatching the scattered sentries with knives and suppressed rounds. Rhea found herself staring at one fallen alien, a reptilian with ceremonial armor still gleaming under the grime. He couldn't have been more than a boy. She hated that she felt something. Pity, maybe, or exhaustion. "Why'd you come here?" she muttered under her breath. "You could have stayed home." But the universe never stayed home when humanity was involved. It always came knocking. Up above, the Coalition's high command scrambled to stabilize the chaos. Fleet Admiral Tharun's voice crackled over Sarath's comm. "General, this has gone too far. We are bleeding ships and men at an unsustainable rate. Pull back to orbit and let us cleanse the surface entirely." "Shh," Sarath hissed. "You think orbital fire will do what your last bombardment didn't? You'll burn your own troops." "Better that than let these monsters live," Tharun snapped. "You called them human, but these are not men. They are something else. Something Earth made when it decided to breed with extinction." Sarath's claws curled over the console. He wanted to argue, to defend his pride, his strategy, his empire. But deep down, he knew Tharun was right about one thing. The Deathworlders weren't men anymore. They were the answer to a question no one else in the galaxy had ever dared to ask: what happens when life refuses to bow to death? In the ruins of Sector 7, that answer took shape. Hundreds of human soldiers rallied under the tattered flag of the Terran Legion. The flag was old, an artifact from before the fall of Earth. Its edges were burned, its colors faded, but it flew, defiantly, over the corpses of machines and aliens alike. Commander Vale stood beneath it, his armor cracked but his eyes steady. "We hold the field," he told his officers. "Not for victory, for memory." His voice carried through the ranks, transmitted by shortwave to every Deathworlder still breathing. "They think we're animals. That's fine. But we're the kind of animal that chews its own leg off to live. Remember that." The soldiers nodded. Some laughed. Some cried quietly into the dust. Then they took up their weapons and went back to killing. As night fell again, the humans launched a counteroffensive. They moved through the ravines and valleys, using the wreckage of enemy mechs as cover. Coalition drones tried to track them, but the Deathworlders emitted strange heat signatures, either by chance or design, that made them blend with the battlefield's chaos. Their heart rates didn't spike before attacks. Their movements were irregular, feral. They weren't predictable like disciplined soldiers. They were predators. In the orbit above, the Coalition fleet adjusted course. Massive carriers aligned for atmospheric insertion, preparing to deploy shock troops to reclaim the surface. Tharun watched from the bridge, his many eyes fixed on the planet below. "Initiate Phase 2, he ordered. "Let them drown in fire." But as the command went out, his bridge lights dimmed. Alarms began to wail. "What is this?" he roared. "Report!" The technician's voice cracked. "Sir, it's the Terran virus. They've breached the network. It's rewriting our targeting systems." Tharun's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Impossible. Their technology is primitive." The technician shook his head. "Not anymore." One by one, the orbital bombardment cannons turned, not toward the planet, but toward each other. Within minutes, the void above Varn became a slaughterhouse of friendly fire. Coalition cruisers erupted into flame, raining molten debris down onto the battlefield below. The humans cheered when the sky lit up. They didn't know how it happened, only that the heavens had turned in their favor. Ria's squad moved through the storm of falling wreckage, ducking under sheets of burning metal. "That's our cue," she said grimly. "They're losing control." Her second-in-command, a massive man named Torres, laughed through his cracked helmet. "Guess even gods bleed when you pull hard enough." They reached the Coalition's main power relay, an obsidian tower bristling with weapon mounts and signal arrays. Coalition troops guarded its base, thousands of them, dug in deep. Ria looked up, jaw tightening. "We take that tower, we take their eyes," she said. Torres frowned. "And how do you plan to do that with 4 of us?" "We've got something better than numbers," Ria said. "We've got desperation." The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. The humans hit the tower like a storm, using the falling debris and electromagnetic disruption as cover. Plasma fire turned the night into day, and still they pushed forward. Ria didn't remember every kill, just flashes, her knife sliding between alien plates, her suit alarms screaming, Torres catching a bolt meant for her and going down without a word. She climbed the tower through smoke and flame, using her rifle as a club when the ammo ran dry. At the top she found the control core, a glowing column of alien crystal humming with energy. Without hesitation she jammed the detonator into its base. "For Earth," she whispered, and pressed the trigger. The explosion was seen for miles. A beam of light tore through the red clouds, and the entire Coalition command network across Varn went dark. From orbit, Admiral Tharun watched the sensors vanish one by one. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "They destroyed the relay with their bare hands." His officer turned slowly. "Sir, they're not human. They can't be." Tharun's eyes narrowed. "Then what are they?" Down below, Ria stood among the ruins, her armor blackened, her oxygen alarms screaming. She stared up at the darkened sky. "We're what's left," she murmured. "And what's coming." The humans didn't cheer when the firing stopped. They just waited, because they knew this wasn't over. The coalition wouldn't accept humiliation. They'd regroup, reinforce. The Deathworlders had bought a moment, a heartbeat of victory in a war that would last generations. But that was enough. On Earth, a heartbeat had always been enough to start something eternal. When dawn broke, the surviving Deathworlders gathered among the ashes. There were only a few thousand left from tens of thousands who'd landed. They looked like ghosts, but ghosts with guns. Commander Vale stood among them, his armor cracked, his voice rough. "They'll come again," he said. "With more ships, more soldiers, more hate." He looked around at his people, their faces streaked with soot and blood. "So we'll be ready, because this time they've seen us. They know what Deathworlders are." The wind carried the scent of burned metal and rain. Somewhere, across the field, an alien child cried out for its mother. Rhea turned toward the sound and whispered almost gently, "Welcome to our world." And far above, where the debris of the fleet drifted through orbit, the stars seemed dimmer, as if the universe itself had blinked, shocked into silence. The war for Varn should have ended with the flames, but it didn't. The coalition could not comprehend surrender. They could only reorganize, rebuild, and return. To them, retreat was temporary, a tactical pause before the hammer fell again. For humanity, it was something different. The Deathworlders didn't retreat. They regrouped like predators shifting their hunt, patient and deliberate. The field of Varn had become both grave and forge. From its ashes rose something the galaxy had never seen, a unified human force that no longer fought for home, but for the very concept of survival itself. General Surath sat alone in the remains of his command center, lit by the faint blue of flickering holoscreens. The once proud commander of the 5th Legion looked nothing like the symbol of imperial might he had been. His armor was scorched, his scales dulled, his claws shaking slightly as he poured a ration of nutrient fluid into a cracked cup. The reports were merciless. Half the fleet gone, the planetary command structure shattered, morale in collapse. Worse still, whispers had begun among the surviving troops. They said the humans weren't natural, that they were specters born from their own world's madness. They called them the ghosts of Earth. Sarath had tried to silence the talk, but even he couldn't deny the truth that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. They'd thrown everything they had at the Deathworlders, and the humans had only grown stronger. He stared out through the shattered viewport at the dim red horizon. The ground was still smoldering, riddled with craters that stretched for miles. The bodies had already been buried beneath layers of ash and dust. The battlefield was quiet now, eerily quiet. But he knew better. Somewhere out there, beneath that stillness, humanity was watching. Waiting. Planning. "General?" came a voice from behind him. It was his aide, the young avian officer who had survived the first wave of slaughter. "Command has issued new orders. We are to regroup in orbit. The High Council wants to begin the planetary purge protocol." Sarath turned slowly, his golden eyes weary. "And you think orbital fire will cleanse what's already infected us?" The avian hesitated. "Sir, they're inside our systems, our strategy, our morale." Sarath rose, pacing to the window. "They've learned how we think. Every maneuver I plan, they anticipate. Every weakness I try to hide, they exploit. It's as if they've lived 1,000 wars before this one." "Sir," the avian whispered, "you make them sound like gods." Sarath shook his head. "No, not gods. Just devils who learn to survive in hell." Far beneath them, among the jagged wrecks of the battlefield, the Deathworlders had begun the impossible task of rebuilding. The survivors moved in silence, working by instinct and exhaustion. The air was thick with the smell of oil, blood, and ozone. Rhea Lorne sat against the side of a scorched tank, her armor stripped down to its skeletal frame. Her right arm was bound in splints, her skin blistered from radiation burns. Yet she smiled faintly as she watched Torres' old plasma rifle being welded into a new turret mount. He died 2 days ago, and they'd buried him in the shadow of the power tower he'd helped destroy. "He'd like that," she murmured. Commander Vale approached, his limp more pronounced than before. "We've scavenged enough parts to get the long-range comms working again," he said. "Might be able to reach the fleet if any of them are still up there." Rhea snorted. "If they are, they're probably surrounded by the Coalition's next wave." "That's fine," Vale said quietly. "Let them come. We'll be ready." He looked at her, his eyes hard but calm. "You did good work, Sergeant. What you did at the tower, it bought us time. And right now, time's the most valuable thing in the universe." Rhea tilted her head back and looked at the dull orange sky. "You ever wonder if any of them, back home I mean, ever thought we'd get this far?" "No," Vale said after a pause. "They never expected us to. That's why we did." For a brief moment they sat in silence, listening to the wind. In that silence was something profound, a kind of peace only those who had looked death in the face could understand. It didn't last. It never did. An explosion echoed from the northern ridge, followed by a blinding flare of light. Alarms crackled to life across the Deathworlder camp. "Incoming! Coalition strike!" Rhea was already on her feet before the words had finished echoing. "Positions!" she shouted. The sky split open as drop pods rained down, streaking fire across the horizon. Thousands of them. The ground shook as they landed, and within seconds the Coalition's second invasion had begun. Rhea grabbed her rifle, slamming a new energy cell into place. "They don't stop, do they?" Vale smiled grimly. "Neither do we." The humans dug in, transforming their makeshift camp into a fortress. Autocannons salvaged from alien wrecks hummed to life, and anti-air turrets spat streaks of plasma into the heavens. When the first wave of enemy troops hit the perimeter, the Deathworlders met them with controlled fury. The Coalition had learned from their first mistakes. They came in faster, harder, with more discipline. Armored divisions surged across the plain, supported by drones and heavy walkers. But the humans had adapted too. They had booby-trapped every approach, turning the battlefield into a maze of fire and shrapnel. The first Coalition charge disintegrated under a storm of improvised explosives. The second wave fared no better. Rhea led her squad along the trenches, shouting orders over the chaos. "Keep moving! Don't let them fix on your position." Explosions rocked the ground, sending geysers of dirt and smoke into the air. The humans fought like cornered beasts, ruthless, unpredictable. Coalition troops who managed to breach the lines found themselves dragged into close combat, their energy rifles useless against the sheer brutality of a human knife or the crushing impact of a powered gauntlet. One soldier described it later as fighting nightmares that refused to bleed. Sarath watched the chaos unfold from orbit. The holofeed flickered with static, but what little he saw chilled him. His soldiers weren't just losing, they were being hunted. He turned to his aide. "Send in the purifiers." The avian hesitated. "Sir, those are banned by treaty." "Send them!" Sarath roared. The Deathworlders broke every law of war when they refused to die. Now we answer in kind. Minutes later, the skies over Varn shimmered with a dark light. The purifiers, genetically engineered shock troops clad in black armor and wielding radiation weapons, descended like a plague. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. Their only purpose was to annihilate everything biological. When they hit the ground, the temperature dropped, and the air itself seemed to recoil from their presence. Rhea felt the shift before she saw them. The static on her comms went dead, and her visor flickered. "Something's wrong," she muttered. Then the first purifier appeared through the smoke, its silhouette massive, its eyes burning like blue fire. It raised a weapon that screamed with energy and fired. The trench beside her disintegrated, turning the earth into glass. "Fall back," she yelled, dragging a wounded soldier to cover. "Those aren't regular troops." Vale's voice cut through the interference. "Confirmed. They've deployed purifiers. We can't match them head-on. Pull to the secondary line." "We'll be slaughtered before we get there," Rhea snapped. "Then find another way," Vale replied. "You always do." She cursed under her breath and signaled her team to move. They darted through the ruins, using the wreckage for cover. Every second was a fight for breath. The purifiers advanced methodically, burning everything in their path. Their armor absorbed gunfire, their weapons melted steel. And yet, Even they underestimated the Deathworlders. Rhea led her team into the old tunnels beneath the field, the same ones they'd used in the first battle. "Torres built charges down here," she muttered. "If the detonators still work." She didn't need to finish. They did. The humans wired the tunnels with improvised explosives, timing them to the purifier's advance. When the enemy reached the surface entrance, Rhea pressed the detonator. The explosion was deafening. The ground itself convulsed, swallowing entire squads of purifiers into molten debris. The shockwave rippled across the plains. Coalition communication lines failed, orbital command feeds went black, and even General Sarath's ship shook from the force. "What happened?" Tharun's voice demanded over the link. Sarath could only stare at the screens. "They've turned the planet against us." Below, Rhea climbed from the rubble, coughing, her armor scorched but intact. She looked across the horizon at the burning silhouettes of the purifiers collapsing one by one. Her squad emerged behind her, bloodied but alive. "Status?" she rasped. "Still here," one soldier said. "Still angry?" "Good," Rhea said. "Then let's finish this." By nightfall, the Coalition's second invasion had broken. Not because of superior firepower or tactics, but because fear had spread faster than orders. The survivors fled toward their extraction zones, pursued by shadows in human form. In orbit, Sarath made his final report. "We cannot win this war," he said simply. "Not here, not against them." There was silence on the line. Then Tharun's voice, soft and venomous. "Then we burn the world. If we cannot win, we erase it." Sarath closed his eyes. "You'll only teach them how to survive that, too." And as the fleet's reactors charged and the first wave of orbital fire began to descend, humanity once again dug deep, into the dirt, the dark and the very bones of the planet, because they had been born from a world that burned every day, and learned that survival wasn't about avoiding the fire. It was about walking through it. The Deathworlders would endure. They always did. When the storm of war finally broke, it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Threxian swarm descended on New Avalon in waves so vast that the orbital cameras couldn't render them all at once. The planet's atmosphere burned with re-entry plasma as millions of their bioships entered at once, blotting out the sun. For most of the galaxy, this would have been the end. The moment where surrender made more sense than survival. But humanity had always been strange. Deathworlders didn't see an apocalypse. They saw a challenge. The defenders of New Avalon stood in their trenches as the skies went dark, calmly checking weapons, whispering to one another, sharing grim smiles. Major Rourke looked down the line at his troops, mud-covered, exhausted, their armor dented and scarred, and said only, "They're bringing everything they have. Good. So are we." The response wasn't a cheer, just nods. Deathworlders didn't need noise to be terrifying. The first impact shook the continent. The Threxian horde hit like a tidal wave, their ground forces spilling across the plains in a writhing sea of claws and mandibles. Biomechs the size of buildings tore through forests as artillery rained down from orbit. But humanity had learned the art of asymmetric war long before joining the stars. The initial Threxian charge was met not with tanks or fortresses, but with silence. They advanced into empty fields, their formation spreading wide. When the ground itself opened up, entire valley floors collapsed, swallowing the front lines into hidden magma channels detonated from beneath. The shockwaves took out thousands before the Threxians realized what had happened. Then the humans struck. From camouflaged ridgelines, from burrows and trenches invisible to orbital scans, they unleashed railguns, drones, and kinetic slugs that turned the air into molten glass. Each soldier moved like a ghost, masked, silent, communicating through gestures and instinct. They fought not for orders but for each other, and their coordination felt almost supernatural to the enemy. "They don't stop," one Threxian warlord transmitted in disbelief before his line went dark. "They don't fear anything." The battle lasted days without pause. Humanity's orbital fleets engaged above, burning engines red-hot as they intercepted wave after wave of enemy biovessels. Admiral Damaris' voice came through the static-filled comms. calm and steady as she issued firing solutions faster than any AI could predict. The orbital layer turned into a field of drifting wreckage, metal, bone, and fire, casting eerie orange light over the world below. Yet for every ship destroyed, more arrived. The Threxian numbers were endless, an unholy swarm bred to consume. The Council fleets that had once scorned humanity now hovered at the system's edge, watching in horror, unsure whether to intervene or flee. They had come only to observe, convinced that the Deathworlders would finally break. Instead, what they witnessed shook them to their cores. Humanity wasn't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting to make a point. A species that had been told it was too savage, too dangerous, too untamed to be trusted among the stars, was now standing between the galaxy and extinction. On the ground, Rourke's division fell back to the city's outer defenses, every step marked by blood and fire. The Threxians adapted quickly. Their second wave came with hardened carapaces resistant to railgun fire, and their biodrones began using plasma bursts to flush humans from cover. That was when the Deathworlders switched tactics. The engineers, those mad geniuses who thrived under chaos, deployed the Hollow Sun project. They'd built it in secret, a weapon of last resort buried beneath New Avalon's capital. When activated, it created an artificial solar flare, superheating the upper atmosphere to incinerate any unshielded craft in orbit. Rourke gave the order without hesitation. All human vessels, polar retreat. Everyone else, hold the line. He knew what it meant. The orbital fleet pulled back, engines screaming. Seconds later, the Hollow Sun ignited. For a moment it looked like dawn. Then everything above burned. Threxian bioships fell in thousands, their organic hulls disintegrating in fire. The shockwave turned the night into pure, blinding light. Even the Council ships felt the tremor from millions of kilometers away. "They just burned half the atmosphere," a Varelian observer whispered. "To save the rest." The words hung like a prayer. In the silence that followed, the survivors of Rourke's battalion emerged from bunkers. Their armor was scorched, their weapons low on power, but their eyes, those human eyes, still burned with that stubborn, unkillable fire. They regrouped, set up new lines, and prepared for the next assault. Because there would always be a next one. Humanity had learned that lesson long ago. The Threxians weren't done either. Their queen, a creature of immense psychic power, descended personally onto the field. Her presence warped gravity itself, her mind flooding the battlefield with fear, forcing lesser species to their knees. But humans had evolved in fear. They were born into it, raised by it, learned to harness it like a tool. Rourke saw soldiers shaking, saw them clench their teeth and stand anyway. He turned to his comm officer. "Tell command, send in the Deathwalkers." The name alone carried weight. The Deathwalkers weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were veterans of Earth's worst hells. Chernobyl scavengers, deep jungle fighters, vacuum breach survivors. Men and women who had stared into annihilation and smiled back. When they arrived, even the Queen hesitated. Their armor was scarred black, their visors glowing like molten gold, each movement precise, deliberate, inhumanly calm. They advanced through the burning fields as though walking through rain. Where they passed, Threxians fell silent forever. The fight with the Queen lasted hours, her psychic screams echoing through every open comm frequency. She unleashed everything: acid storms, kinetic hives, gravity pulses that shattered stone. The Deathwalkers didn't break. When one fell, another stepped forward without pause. They weren't there to survive. They were there to end it. Rourke himself led the final charge, carrying a thermonuclear lance designed to pierce planetary crust. As he neared the Queen, her voice filled his mind. 1,000 tones of rage and terror. "You cannot win. You are only flesh." Rourke grinned, blood running down his face. "Yeah," he said aloud, "but we're human." He drove the lance forward. The explosion was like a new sun being born. The Queen's scream shattered mountains and then faded into silence. The Threxian army froze, directionless, their hive mind severed. One by one they began to collapse, their forms withering into ash. When the light faded, the plains of New Avalon were littered with the corpses of 1 billion enemies. The Deathworlders stood among them, charred, broken, but victorious. In the aftermath, the Council fleets descended cautiously. They had expected a graveyard, not survivors. The sight of humans walking calmly through the ruins, helping wounded enemies, burying both friend and foe alike, was something no alien mind could easily process. Admiral Damaris, her uniform torn, greeted the Council emissaries herself. "You came to watch us die," she said softly, "and instead, you watched us live." There was no triumph in her tone, only weariness. Humanity didn't celebrate survival. It was their default state. The Council representatives, humbled beyond measure, offered reparations, apologies, treaties. Damaris looked up at the stars still glowing red from battle. "We don't want your fear," she said. "We want your courage. Learn from us. Because one day, something worse than the Threxians will come, and we won't be enough." Years later, New Avalon became the center of a new alliance. The Deathworlder Accord, they called it. A union of species willing to face the unknown together, forged not by politics but by respect. Humanity trained them, shared survival techniques, showed them what it meant to fight not out of hatred but out of love for life itself. The Council historians would write that the Threxian War marked the end of the old galaxy and the beginning of the new. But among the humans who had fought it, no one wrote anything. They just kept building, kept preparing, because deep down, they knew the truth. The universe was vast, full of terrors yet unseen. And when those terrors came, when the stars themselves trembled again, the galaxy would once more look to the little blue planet that had refused to die. And somewhere in the ruins of that first battlefield, a single plaque stood. No grand monument, no speeches, just words, carved by a soldier's hand into stone blackened by fire. They were countless. "We were few, but we were human.